So welcome everybody. I'm coming to you from the Midlands of Ireland, in a town, a little place just outside Athlone in the centre of Ireland. And it's a lovely morning actually, dry and crisp and not too cold. So compassion-focused behaviour support. I remember telling my dad many years ago what I do. I told him I worked in positive behaviour support. And he looked at me and said, "What? You mean there's a negative behaviour support?" And so you could wonder, do we really need the adjective compassionate before behaviour support? Surely all behaviour support is compassionate. But I think looking at behaviour support through the lens of a compassion-focused model can offer a lot in terms of increasing our efficiency in the interventions that we select, that they can be more targeted, that we can have a stronger sequence in the interventions we select with people. And I wonder whether we can offer more depth in our multi-element behaviour support plans. So let's explore that this morning. For many people, the first image that we conjure when we hear the word compassion may be one of kindness and gentleness. And absolutely, that can be part of it. For me, when I hear the word compassion, it's more like this image that conjures in my mind. This firefighter is turning towards suffering and is not just aware of the potential suffering inside the burning building, but is committed to alleviating it. And is committed to alleviating it with knowledge, with skill, with wisdom, and with strength. And for me, these are perhaps the features or the qualities of a compassion-focused behaviour support. So Paul Gilbert describes compassion as, on the one hand, a sensitivity or an awareness of the suffering of self and the suffering of others, and then a deep commitment to try and relieve and prevent that suffering. We're going to spend the second part of this morning thinking about a young fellow by the name of Sean, who's 9 years of age, and he's presenting with very severe anxiety and autistic spectrum disorder. And his anxiety has become so acute that he has not been able to attend school in the last year. So school refusal is the kind of presenting issue. Sean has an older sister with cystic fibrosis, and she has profound and multiple intellectual disabilities. In fact, when she was younger, before Sean was born, she was very ill and in fact nearly died on a number of occasions. Sean is terrified that something will happen to his sister. He's too anxious to go to school. He says, "My head will explode with 2 billion worries." On one occasion, when his mum tried to kind of limit his Nintendo time, he said, "I'll take that Nintendo cord and I'll tie it around my neck and I'll kill myself." Of course, this was terrifying for his mum. And at night, he plays Nintendo until he falls asleep. So his parents will tiptoe into his bedroom late at night and try to get a quilt over him without waking him. So that's just a kind of a situation or a referral that we're going to consider. And I'm just kind of putting it into your mind that it'll maybe we'll be able to make sense of it over the course of this morning. The ways in which we respond, to date at least, is called positive behaviour support. So positive behaviour support starts with a behaviour. In Sean's case, it's school refusal. And that has a consequence, which is why this behaviour has become established. And this consequence is valuable to Sean in the context of certain stimuli. In other words, in certain situations or with certain triggers, this consequence becomes valuable to him. So this ABC, this antecedent behavior consequence understanding of behaviors is accurate, but it's not enough. It's not a sophisticated enough understanding of how behavior occurs in order for us to launch an effective behavior support plan for Sean. What we also need to understand is that there may be other behaviors that he can recruit or can learn that can deliver the same consequence to him. And if those consequences are available more immediately or more probably or with less physical or cognitive effort on his part, then we can predict that these new behaviors will replace the old ones. This is known as the matching law. And it's accurate, but it's not enough. It's not enough information. It's not a sophisticated enough understanding on which to base an effective behavior support plan. What we really need to know are the establishing operations or the setting events, the motivational variables, the features of Sean and the features of the environment that explain why in this situation, this consequence has become so valuable that this behavior is more likely to occur. So if you like, positive behavior support is the science of setting events. It's, and every good behavioral assessment is an act of empathy. It's a stepping inside the shoes of Sean. It's occupying the psychological skin of Sean so that we can see the world from his point of view. And so we can appreciate the importance of these kinds of establishing operations. I suppose my whole hypothesis has been that there's a higher order, perhaps, of establishing operations. That if we are in right relationship, that if we feel a deep sense of connection with family, that if we have access to meaningful and satisfying activity, if we feel that life is under our influence or under a level of kind of control and is not chaotic, and if we have a routine expectation that we're being treated with dignity and respect, then the impact of many of these setting events can be moderated so that perhaps these situations aren't quite so significant, so that perhaps these consequences aren't quite so crucial or valuable. So that's the science part, where I think a compassion-focused model might fit in, is it's a model of emotional regulation. And so it might bring a sense of order or meaning to this science of setting events. It might help us understand where the priorities lie or what to look for as we start to appreciate the motivational variables that set the occasion for behavior. Okay, apologies. That's about as technical as we're going to get this morning. The thing about Paul Gilbert's compassion-focused model is that it kind of highlights the contrast between our old brains and our new brains. What's distinctive about human beings is the extent to which our mind can be pulled into worry. This sleeping dog does not worry that he dropped the frisbee in the park or that the girls won't like him tomorrow. But human beings have this characteristic that we have the cinema screen in the head onto which we project all of the regrets and worries that we might have. So you might look at compassion-focused therapy or look at cognitive behavior therapy and say, yeah, that's very thought-based. Many of the people I work with aren't able to articulate for me the thoughts and worries that they have. I can't access the kinds of cognitive distress that people might have. And I suppose my point about this is that compassion-focused therapy is primarily a model of emotional regulation. And of primary concern to us is the fact that emotion is co-regulated. So if a child is frightened by lightning and is experiencing a high level of arousal, and if the response the child gets is, my God, this is terrible, stop crying, quick, we have to hide, that response will have an impact on the emotion that the child is feeling. In fact, it will escalate the level of emotion further. If a child is experiencing lightning and the response is quiet, I'm trying to talk to someone, don't interrupt, that response will have an effect on the emotion the child is experiencing. That response is likely to escalate the distress of the child is likely to escalate a sense of helplessness as well. If the response is, don't worry, you're safe with me, it does sound scary, doesn't it? Let's have a cuddle until the storm passes. The child may feel more validated and the level of emotion may be regulated to a less distressed state. Okay, so let me kind of bring you back a step to a slightly more traditional application of positive behavior support and walk you through a little bit of the journey that I took on the way to a kind of a more compassion-focused direction. So Brendan is 15 years of age. He's very active. He bounces, he spins, he jumps, he likes to, hop around the house. He finds it very hard to sit still, even for a few seconds. His attention span, even for his favorite activities, seems to be quite short. He needs to move. He has 3 signs for requesting, but those signs happen so fast that they're often very hard to spot or very hard to catch. He's nonverbal. He's preoccupied with food access. He will go through a person, he will go through a door, he will remove a door from a cupboard to get access to food. And the behaviors of concern have been happening for years: slapping, hair pulling every hour, hand biting, slapping his own face many times per hour. And when he's in a heightened state of distress, even projectile vomiting. And unusually for a young man with such a severe level of intellectual disability, he was expelled from school by a very wise and compassionate school principal who wanted to acknowledge that the system was failing to provide him with an education and needed to draw attention to the fact that he needed a more comprehensive level of support than a school could provide. So what happened when we met him was an attempt to put in place a behavior support plan in a particular sequence. And this is a sequence, these are the first 5 things I think of when somebody is referred with severe behavioral challenge. The first thing is, what's this person's level of arousal? Clearly, when you meet Brendan, he's in a very heightened state of arousal. He finds it very hard to settle, very hard to calm. And so one of the things we wanted to do was strip back any possible source of overwhelm, being conscious of our presence, being conscious of the sounds we make and the soundscape around Brendan, speaking to him when we're spoken to, or speaking to him when he communicates with us, but trying to make sure that he's not subject to unnecessary stimulation, at least for a period of time until we can see more clearly what's going on. And the biggest threat to his arousal level is food access. And so we organized the environment so that there was free access to low calorie, no calorie food. And pretty much no matter where he looked, there was a plate with a healthy snack on it. And a couple of other things we did just to dampen the level of arousal in his environment. And then we made a concerted effort to try and connect with him. We actually used video to slow down his interaction so that we could start to see some of the communicative initiatives that he's making, so that we can reciprocate those, so that we can follow up on those and build on his initiative. So if he made a sign like this, we interpreted that as, you want to go for a drive in the car. And if we didn't have a better idea or a better way of communicating with him, then we went out in the car. We then tried to build sequences of activity and map those pictorially. First we do this, and then we do this, and then we do this. And we tried to select activities and sample activities so that we would build better engagement from him. And the point about this is, then and only then, in my view, does it make sense to start to teach. If we start our behavior support plan with an attempt to teach Brendan an alternative way of communicating the message of his behavior, he's in too heightened a state of arousal for learning. or for effective learning. And we're probably in too heightened a state of arousal to teach him. He needs to be in rapport with us. He needs to know that we're socially significant in order for him to attend to what we're doing. And I think he needs a map or a model for time. He needs to know what to expect of us and what's expected of him in order that any teaching might make sense. So for me, there's a sequence to these interventions. There's low arousal first, and if that's not an issue, then we move on to rapport, because we're only as good in behavioral support as the rapport that we have. And then if we're in rapport in a given moment, then we try and create expectation for time and for activity. Then it makes sense to teach, and then and only then, for me, does it make sense to offer somebody an incentive to communicate in the emerging way rather than with challenging behavior. So these kinds of 5 features have been around for some time. If we read the first person accounts of autism, for example, if we read the biographies of the autobiographies of Donna Williams, it's a wonderful insight into the ways in which we can be subject to sensory overwhelm, visual overwhelm, but much more frequently overwhelmed through the auditory and spoken modality. There's wonderful interventions in terms of how we can build rapport. In fact, we all have an intuitive ability to build rapport. When this all sleeping, all pooping baby thing comes home from the hospital, we all have a kind of an intuitive sense of what to do. We don't get lost down at the business end of the nappy. We all kind of tend to offer full face to the baby and follow the baby's gaze and attention and name what it is that the baby sees. So the baby kind of looks away and sees the light. We also notice that the baby sees the light and we say, that's right, that's a light. The baby has a perfect right to turn around and say, hang on a second, lady, I don't do language yet. I'm only 5 days old. I'm not at that developmental stage yet. Of course, we're using words as a scaffolding for the baby's experience, and we're waiting for a social response. And if we get a social response, then we celebrate that, we magnify that, we reinforce that. So that rapport building is very, very important for anybody whose sense of rapport with others is tentative. Once we're in rapport, we can start to look to see what brings engagement. And for many people, what brings engagement is preferred activity, is routine and ritual, the ability to be able to freewheel through some parts of time, and the choice of activity. But increasing predictability is a common feature for many multi-element behavior support plans, particularly for behavior support plans for people with autistic spectrum disorder. Once there's a map for time, then we can teach people an alternative way of communicating, teach people that when they use their no effectively, for example, when they use their no, it's effective. So whether the no is a spoken word or whether it's putting their hand up, I need to set it up. You know, with Brendan, I used to go in with a guitar and play. Of course, I can't play guitar. And he would kind of indicate no. And I would say, no, okay. And then we'd put down the guitar and leave the room for a moment so that he could see that's effective. You can trust me. When you use your hand to say no, I hear that. You don't need to slap yourself in the face. You don't need to bite your hand. And then we can set up incentive. We can set up meaningful visual ways of capturing the goal that we have together, the contract that we have together. So in Brendan's case, after putting this behavior support plan in place, we saw no aggressive behavior for many, many, many years. But that's not the measure of the effectiveness of that intervention. He regularly requests using signs. He participates in food preparation, in smoothie making, in soup making with great delight. nibbling the carrots as he goes, but making a very fine meal. He has good access to the community. As a visitor, I wouldn't suggest that he's, an integral part of the community yet. I think he visits community effectively, and that's limiting. In the west of Ireland, we have a beautiful holy mountain called Croagh. It's a very tough climb, and he climbed that effectively. The most important outcome is that he's still living and deeply connected with his family. So this is a study that we published some years ago of 4 individuals with all of whom had a diagnosis of autistic spectrum disorder, 4 young men with histories for many, many years of very severe, aggressive, and self-injurious behavior. This would be at the much more severe end of behavioral challenge. And in all cases, when we did the kind of comprehensive Lavinia and Willis style behavioral assessments using the behavior assessment guides, the function of the behavior in all 4 cases is escape. It's overwhelm. The behavior is saying, leave me alone, go away, it's too much, no. Escape motivated behavior, which is the most common function of behavior for many, many people with overwhelm. So in this study, we had an opportunity to put in place the sequence of interventions, starting with low arousal interventions. You can see this is Brendan here. And so this is a baseline of his behavior. And we, after we put in place after 2 weeks, we put in place the low arousal interventions that I described. And then we were working really hard on rapport building protocols before going ahead with visual sequencing using pictures to sequence his day. By then, we didn't really have a behavior to track. And so we took a precursor behavior of hand biting and started to track that, and saw that with escape communication training and differential reinforcement, we achieved that at near 0 levels. So we were writing this study up when I realized that 85% of the reductions in these behaviors, 85% of the baseline rates of behaviors disappeared merely in response to the first 2 phases. So after low arousal interventions and rapport building interventions, 85% of the behaviors that had been going on for years had stopped. And so it made me wonder, is there something fundamental going on here? Actually, as a lazy person, it made me wonder, is there a quick or easy way of doing this? We had spent perhaps 100 hours on behavioral assessment and behavior support plan development meetings. And I wondered, was there a quicker way of achieving the outcomes that were achieved? While this was happening, I was working as part of a dynamic behavior support team where we were providing emergency on call to families and group homes, thinking about which group home might need support at the weekends, for example. And we were having conversations like, no, I think we're going to be okay up in that house because Kathy is there and Kathy has it, and we might be okay down here because Miriam is on over the weekend and she has it. And I started to wonder, what is this it that we describe people as having that gives us the confidence to know that they'll be able to sustain behavioral challenge even to quite an intense degree, or that they'll be able to prevent behaviors from arising. And so I started to wonder, is this it a thing called mindfulness? Is it that at certain times as staff, or perhaps because we're well supported, or perhaps because the last time something bad happened in our work, we met with a compassionate response. Perhaps we're able to be present enough to intuitively know when to create a low arousal environment. Perhaps we are present enough to rest our attention on the person enough to pace our interactions according to the cues that we're given and intuitively build rapport. Maybe if we developed and nurtured the skill of mindfulness, maybe we would intuitively introduce low arousal interventions and rapport building interventions that might prevent hundreds of hours of time in positive behavior support. So mindfulness is paying attention, but it's paying attention without the pull of mind. It's paying attention on purpose. It's paying attention to what I intend to pay attention to. And it's doing that in a kind way. It's doing it in a curious way. It's doing it with acceptance rather than with judgment. It's paying attention in the present moment. Very, very easily said, but difficult to do if last Tuesday night I was paying attention and I got hit or I got hurt or I got reprimanded, because those events will act as a terrifically stressful pull on my attention the next time I'm in a similar situation. So this is one of my favorite research studies. It's a very small scale research study by the great Norbay Singh, who has gone on to do wonderful work researching the impact of mindfulness for people with intellectual disabilities and for staff and carers. This is one of the earlier studies, and it's a study with 3 adults with profound and multiple intellectual disabilities. And what they did is they measured indices of happiness. They measured the numbers of times that these adults smiled, gestured, chuckled, made eye contact. They counted them. And then they went and took the team of carers and trained them in a relatively straightforward mindfulness practice. Nothing sophisticated. They didn't go to Nepal or anything like that. In fact, it was a quite straightforward 8 to 10 minute mindfulness exercise. And they asked the team to log their practice of the mindfulness exercise day by day in a mindfulness diary. Came back some weeks later, measured again the indices of happiness in the 3 adults, and found huge increases by 150, 250% in the indices of happiness of these 3 adults. So the 3 adults were probably not aware even that an intervention had taken place. Why was training staff in mindfulness apparently associated with increases in indices of happiness in 3 adults? What's going on here? Is it that when I commit to a little bit of training and nurturing the skill of being present, that I radiate a bit more happiness? That doesn't add up to a behavioral scientist. Happiness radiates, Brian. Is it that when I'm present and mindful, my ability to co-regulate emotion is enhanced? That when I respond to people, I don't escalate the level of arousal that they're experiencing. Maybe I'm intuitively able to be more low arousal when it's needed. Maybe I am more aware of the wide range of cues and signals that these people are offering. And with that awareness, I'm able to respond in a wider range of ways, reciprocating and deepening the connection between us. It's an intuitive hypothesis, no more. It's an intriguing hypothesis, no more. So thinking about the compassion-focused model for a moment, it's based, I suppose, on a lot of science and a lot of wisdom going back millennia. It's based on an evolutionary understanding of how we ended up with this brain this wonderful and imperfect tool. And it says that there are 3 emotional regulation systems that we have evolved to have that are important to understand and understanding how emotions like anxiety and anger are regulated. So the first is our threat detection system. Our threat detection system overrides any other emotional regulation system that we might have. Our ancestors survived to pass on their genes because when they heard a rustle in the leaves, they didn't say to themselves, sure, it'll be grand. They breathed in fast, got oxygen into the big muscles, and they made rapid decisions as to whether to fight or flight. But there's a second emotional regulation system that our ancestors evolved. And it's really important. Our ancestors would not have survived. Our genes would not have been passed on if our ancestors didn't develop very well-honed abilities to nurture, to soothe, to care, to affiliate in networks and bands, to protect each other, to calm each other down. That affiliation system is very, very important because when we try to co-regulate emotion, these are the skills that we call upon when we're trying to respond to the whispers of anxiety and anger. And then we all have a third emotional regulation system, which is our drive, our ability to be motivated to go out and seek resources and reinforcers and so on. The part that gives us energy and the part that relaxes when the resources have been achieved. So the important point is that each of these systems has a role in regulating the other. Many of us might learn to regulate our anxiety system with our drive system. So, work is overloading. I have too much to do. How will I get through it? Every day is fearful and I dread it. So I work harder and harder and harder to try and, instead of being kind to myself, instead of being kind enough to have the courage to say, could we have a talk about the expectations that are placed on me at the moment? Could we start to reduce maybe some of this threat? So there are other ways and other skills that we can call on to regulate our own anxiety and threat. And so from the point of view of the 5 steps in behavior support, when we're thinking about the sequence of interventions, when we're thinking about prioritizing the setting events or establishing operations, perhaps first we look to the sources of low arousal. How can we organize the environment so that the level of arousal that the person is subject to is reduced? How can we use that space, even in a moment, to build rapport and reciprocity? And once we've done that, then and only then, perhaps, does it make sense to build engagement, to sample activities, to start to explore the wider range of reinforcers that an environment might be able to offer. For me, this is just a sequence that makes sense. There may, of course, be many other ways of sequencing behavior support plans. So the key is co-regulation. Really, this is just an excuse to show you lots of cute pictures. Our emphasis is on the soothing system. One of the teachings, I suppose, of Paul Gilbert and compassion-focused therapy is it's not just, compassion is not just the flow from ourselves to others. It's the being open to the flow of compassion from others to ourselves, and it's the flow of compassion from ourselves to ourselves. It's all 3. So before we start thinking perhaps about how we might soothe others at times of distress, how is our own soothing system? How often is my soothing system triggered? What triggers it? When it's activated, how strong is it? Is it a good, strong connection that I have when my soothing system is activated? What's the feeling that goes with it? Is there a place in my life for a sense of calm, a sense of contentment? Or how would I describe the feeling when my soothing system is activated? What behaviors go with it? Is it relaxing? Is it caregiving? Is it care receiving? What's it like in the body? Can I recognize that? Or have I been so busy, so caught up in the flow of things that I've lost sight of what it's like to be at ease, soothed? What happens to my thoughts? What happens to my imagination when this soothing system is active? So, thank you for staying with me. Let's think about Sean again. So remember, Sean was this 9-year-old fellow with severe anxiety and attention, autistic spectrum disorder. His family have had an early experience of distress. He's too anxious to go to school. His head will explode, he says. And he plays with his Nintendo a lot. Where do we start? Do we start with, reinforcement contracts? Do we start with setting events? Where do we begin? And I think there are many options. That's the great thing about multi-element behavior support, is it takes a situation where we're stuck and we feel corralled, and it says, well, there's a framework here. There's ways of adapting the environment, the skills we can teach, there's triggers we can remove, perhaps, there's incentives we can offer, there's ways of responding. There's this whole multi-element framework that gives us options. For me, the thing to concentrate on is emotional co-regulation. When I was with the family, I was with the parents for about 90 minutes. And I suppose we used the time to think about anxiety, not just in Sean, but in the family, in the house. We had time, I suppose, to acknowledge what the history of this family was, what it's really been through, how it nearly lost their firstborn child, the extraordinary, courageous lengths that these parents went to. And I won't go into the detail, but it was an international effort to keep their daughter alive. The white-knuckled fear that this house has experienced on many occasions before Sean was born, and the extraordinary success that these young parents experienced in bringing and keeping their daughter alive and in offering her a superb quality of life. It's a great success story. So as we talked about this and its impact, not necessarily directly on Sean, but just in the house, the sense of threat, the things we've had to learn to do to keep anxiety at bay. And the dad turned to me and he said, I've got it. I've got it, he said. And he used the phrase, these walls don't shake. These walls don't shake. Sean needs to not just hear, but needs to experience the fact that things are better now, that we're in a solid place, that we as parents can represent safety for him. And so the place they chose to the place we chose to start intervention was in fact the bedtime routine. Quite clearly, Sean has not developed the skill for self-soothing. His method for falling asleep is playing on the Nintendo in his bed until it falls from his fingers and he collapses onto the bed. He does not have a good repertoire of skills for folding his mind into gentle sleep. And so this is a good place to begin. And so the intervention involved his dad reading him a bedside story without any Nintendo. Sorry, first of all, a good bedtime routine, good markers for his body to say, you know, get your body ready because it's time. So those kind of anchor points, like you know, the predictability of bringing a plane down onto the runway, finishing with a bedtime story. And then the book would go down, and his dad sat by the bed silently in order to offer Sean the reassurance of his presence. But if Sean attempted to get up, he was gently and silently redirected back to sleep. Now is a time for sleep as best we can. Once Sean was sleeping for 4 days, which by the way took place in the first week after the consultation, he was a very tired lad. Then his dad moved the chair after the bedtime story outside the bedroom, and in a very familiar sequence of events, gradually faded out his presence so that Sean was sleeping independently. This made a big difference because now Sean's body is not waking up in the middle of in the middle of sleep, you know, after 4 or 5 hours sleep. He's actually had the huge advantage of a full night's sleep before we kind of consider what to do about school. The second intervention was that the rule of the house became that there is Nintendo only for 40 minutes every day. And Sean's job was to decide when those 40 minutes would be. And he said, "It's not fair, Mom. My friends have Nintendo for more than 40 minutes. And his mom very wisely said, "Your friends go to school. When you go to school, we'll be able to talk about how long you have your Nintendo. But until you go to school, 40 minutes is your time." And so the family set about brainstorming a long list of activities, non-screen activities that Sean could do. Things he could do on his own, things he could do with a parent, and things that the whole family could do. And then those activities in a family planning meeting were put on a weekly planner. And the activities had to include exercise, and they had to include whole family activities, time in which, activities in which Sean got attention and recognition and joy for the whole range of non-anxious behaviors that he shows. We also had chat time, regular time each day where Sean was invited to consider anything he might be worrying about. So there's a little bit of education about Sean. There's such a thing as worry. It's what we put our mind on. And he was instructed to write his worries down on a piece of paper, hand over the piece of paper to his parents, and then those worries would be taken out at chat time. So there's a place for managing worry in this house. And you know what? We're actually really good at managing worry. We do it really well. In chat time, and sprinkled throughout the day, there would be conversations about his amazing older sister. And a more accurate, more balanced portrayal of his sister was given. Instead of Sean overhearing snippets about the worry conversations about his sister, actually he got a more balance, that he was told, for example, that her teachers were really, really happy with her today, that she did really, really well in physio, that we're really proud of her achievements. And in fact, one of the things that Sean was able to do was to help out more with the jobs, instead of kind of his sister being away from him and minded in a separate part of the home, that Sean was actually brought in on the various care activities that his sister required, and became very good at knowing, how to regulate the feed for his sister and so on, and got a lot of recognition for his parents for the role that he played within the family, rather than kind of looking on as a worried onlooker. teaching Sean a little bit about his own signs of anxiety in his body. We taught him some very, very simple anxiety management techniques. One of the most effective anxiety management techniques that I've ever come across is 7-11 breathing. It's a recognition of the fact that all of us, when we're anxious or angry, we have this evolved response of drawing in air quickly so that the body can become aroused for a fight or flight response. And so it's a terrific skill to be able to slow down that response, to be able to breathe in for 7 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and breathe out for 11. And it works if I'm overwhelmed at work. It works if I'm doing a driving test. It works if the supermarket is too busy. It works if I get a worry that something is going to happen to my sister. It creates a little space in which I have time to think and consider other ways of thinking, or I have time to act and consider what's the best way of acting for me. In fact, one of the interventions that we did was that the whole family did a little bit of mindfulness practice together. And so the recommendation is that when Sean presents with worry in the morning about going to school, before responding, his mom or his dad will practice a little mindfulness technique, starting by managing their own anxiety and their own arousal in their own body. And when they're feeling nice and calm, they'll ask Sean to write his worry down. And then he'll hand the worry over to them. They won't need to discuss that now because there'll be a chat time this evening. And we can continue with the lovely business of going to school. We had all sorts of behavior support meetings planned and school meetings planned. And, school refusal can often require a whole system of response. And I think it's just a testament to these amazing, amazing parents that within 2 weeks, Sean was able to return to school for full days and express a lot of contentment at meeting his friends again. So, Joe, I intended to keep talking until 10:15 so that nobody would have any time to ask any awkward or difficult questions, but that's me for now.
Okay, brilliant. Well, we have had some questions come in.
I was hoping not.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You'll have to do some of your 7-11 breathing to prep.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
For answering. Okay, brilliant. I will read them out one at a time. I guess that might be the easiest way. So the first one was, this sounds a bit like attachment theory to me. Would you say there is a close relationship between PBS and attachment?
Wow, what a wonderful question. There's a wonderful model, Joe, called Circle of Security. And I think it captures in a very succinct way what's going on here, which is saying, that the model has the hands available. And so from the top of the circle, the child goes out and explores. And so the job of the parent is to, encourage and allow the child to be adventurous. In other words, using rapport to engage that kind of third system, that drive system. Go be adventurous, go find new things, go have fun, okay? But then being the hands at the bottom of the circle in this lovely model is also being there to reassure when the child returns with anxiety or worry. So the child has fallen and hurt their knees, and you're able to give reassurance. And so that's a lovely model, I think, of attachment. One of the lovely parts of it is this idea of mood music. that all of us have kind of mood music playing in the background. So a child gets up on a slide, and if my mood music is the shark music, you know, from Jaws, then my thoughts, my attention, my motivation is, oh my God, something is going to happen to my child. And so I might step in and prevent the exploration and convey a sense of fear to the child. And that's how the emotion is co-regulated. But if my mood music might be, you know, upbeat and uplifting, it might be, you know, oh, I don't know, but some kind of, and so I might take joy and pleasure in the adventurous spirit that my child is showing at the top of the slide. And only I know with my wise mind as a parent, which mood music is more appropriate for which child and which situation. I suppose the important point about a mindfulness-based orientation is that if I can become aware of the mood music that's playing in me at the moment, then I can be aware of how I'm co-regulating emotion. And that can kind of inform a lot in terms of my ability to take wise decisions. I hope that makes sense.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, that's a really interesting way of putting it as well, like with mood music. Yeah, definitely. Right, question 2. The 5-step in behaviour support for Brendan, was this based on a PERMA model or was this taken from observations?
To be honest with you, I spent about 12 years working in a wide range of settings with children and with adults. And I had a very particular experience, I suppose, going round to mainstream schools in the community, where at that time schools were having their first experiences of integrating young people with autism. And so I found myself repeating the same framework over and over again. You know, where a teacher might have been saying, I can't seem to get him to sit. He won't do his schoolwork for me. He won't. And I'm saying, yes, of course we'll get to schoolwork. But you know what you got to do first? We got to look at his level of arousal first. We got to build rapport first. And then we'll think about a curriculum of meaningful schoolwork. So I suppose I found myself saying the same 5 things over and over. And that's how the framework developed for me. But I'm quite sure there's somebody else out there who said the same thing. So.
I mean, like, yeah, again, I remember from speaking to you for the podcast episode, you were going, it was quite systematic in the end about like, this is step 1, this is step 2. It's a really...
And for many people, Joe, they're not in low arousal and they're in perfect rapport. And so the behavior support plan maybe needs to start with the predictability, or it needs to start with the communication. We've kind of ticked those boxes in our heads as we're observing.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so that sort of leads us a bit onto the third question, which is, do you use the principles of sensory processing and integration to look at the person's arousal levels and sensory preferences?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I think I really appreciate about positive behavior support, and maybe it gets bad press for this from the more radical wing of our field, but I think there's an openness to anything that will help. And so we use our observations to see, does a particular sensory integration idea have a positive impact on the person? It's not the theory that tells us that this is effective for this person. It's the data, right? So if a massage helps bring about a lower arousal because of deep pressure massage helps with sensory integration issues, fantastic. It's on my periodic service review. It's in my intervention plan. Not because I'm an ardent advocate of sensory integration, but because I've seen it work for this particular person. Great.
Yeah, lovely. And it is that individualization, isn't it?
It is very
much. which again nicely leads us on to our next sort of question. So this was the last question that came up. Is there a checklist or audit to look at the aspects of a low arousal environment that you could sort of use as an initial way to go like, oh, this is what will work for this person?
And you know what? That's a really great question. I'm going to have to use those magic 3 words. I don't know. Okay. I'm aware that occupational therapists in particular are very skilled and very well resourced in this area. So yes, I'm sure it's out there and I don't use them. What I do is I try to sit in the environment in which the person is sitting. And I try not to get too distracted by the events and actions going on. And I try and sit there and wonder, what's it like to be this kid or this adult in this place? And we could highlight the arousal level from the noise and from the sensory environment. But what's the emotional context like? What's the communicational context like? What's the respect context like? What's the activity context like? And this, of course, is what we love about positive behavior support, because it is this multi-contextual understanding of behavior. We take the text of behavior and we say, this does not make full sense until we see it in a communicational context, until we see it in an emotional context, until we see it in a health context, until we see it in a motivational context, until we see it in the situational context. And each context that we find that allows us to interpret the text of behavior enriches and deepens the meaning of behavior. And so isn't this what's really cool about PBS? It's the search for meaning. It starts out before we walk in the door, right? We say, this behavior is meaningful. This person is trying to communicate as best they can, right? The more context you offer me, the richer my understanding of the message of this behavior is. Okay.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, like, one thing that you remind me of there is I went into a service once where, you know, that intangible, like I can't quite put my finger on it, but I go in and my arousal level is immediately like, oh my,
That's it.
this is a really difficult
Yeah,
environment to be in.
that's
And
it.
living in that environment 24/7 must be so difficult.
100%. And what used to happen to me, Joe, especially when I was a younger professional, to be honest, probably still happens, is I go into this environment and I'm in a heightened state of arousal. And then I get the thought, they're expecting me to do something here? Oh my God. And then I get this terrible imposter syndrome. And what's happening is that the thoughts are actually starting to, reverberate and heighten the level of emotion. And so it's even more important in this moment that I'm able to sort of sit still and be with myself for a wee while and figure out, okay, I'm stuck, but maybe if I keep listening, I won't be stuck in a little while. And I think it's important to say that that's universal, right? That no matter how many years we have on the clock, I'm more dangerous as a practitioner in positive behavior support when I think I know than when I know I don't know.
Perfect. I say that to a lot of supervisees when they come to me and they go like, oh my God, I've literally no idea what to do. It's like,
Join
right,
the club. Yep.
like that's fine. Like if you
Yep.
go in somewhere and know what to do without doing an assessment, you're not really doing positive behavior support. No, spend time, get to know people.
Yep.
That's exactly what you should be doing.
We may not know, we've sure got a lot of questions, right? We've sure the more experienced we are, just the more questions we can ask. Yeah. Sorry, Joe, I think I got it.
Brilliant. There was one last question that came in while we're talking. Let me just, so it was just, are there any beginner texts which you would recommend as being good to read?
Oh boy, isn't that a great question?
Yeah, I mean, like, in all honesty, I have a biography that I share with supervisees. So if someone is interested, I'll put my email into the chat, and you're very welcome to email me, and I will ping that biography over to people. Uh,
You probably can't see it. No, you can't see it. But it's Families and Positive Behaviour Support by Joseph Lusishin. I think, reading Joseph Lusishin, for me, it's really about not just interventions that kind of sit in the abstract, but how do we meet real families? How do we identify family routines and family structures and family priorities and start to knit in what we know from a family-centered point of view rather than from a kind of professional-centered point of view. There's lovely examples of good interventions in there. I like it because it's real life stuff. So that would be a recommendation.
Yeah, perfect. This is one of my favourite ones currently.
Ah, very good.
Yeah, lovely. Okay. I don't know whether there's sort of, I'll answer this. It's about the link to watch again. So these will be shared with all participants after the event, so you can watch things again. We've had tons of comments come in, Brian, about fabulous presentation, really useful. We've got a lot to take away from that. So thank you ever so much, everybody. That's it's always nice to know that it's been useful. And thanks, Brian.
Very welcome. Lovely to be here.